Thank you for joining us. My name is Murray Flagg. I am the Director of Spiritual Care, Bereavement, and Education for Harmony Hospice, and we are glad to have you with us today and welcome you for this session. Just a couple of pieces of housekeeping as we get started. Do want to let you know that this is being recorded. When we come to the end, we will stop recording and have just a couple of minutes if there are questions someone wants to ask that they don't particularly want recorded. I do have the Zoom chat up, so if you have a question you want to put up there, I'll try to glance over and make sure that I stay cognizant of what's happening. If you are unmuted, please be aware that anything that you say or sounds that happen in your area come through to everybody. So the choice is yours whether to mute, but if you want to ask a question, make sure that you go down to the bottom of your screen and unmute it, because otherwise you'll be talking away, and since there are almost 40 people on, I don't have everybody, I can't see everybody at one time, so I won't know that your mouth is moving necessarily unless you happen to be in the group that I have up. So we're glad to have you. This is Conflict Management. The subtitle is, Why is Everyone So Strange While I'm So Normal? And that's part of the challenge of conflict. Part of the reality is that we all live in a world that is normal to us. Now that world right now is a different normal than what we've known, because with the COVID-19, we're all living in a different normal, which is causing us some challenges. And some of you may be finding that where you are in isolation or social distance with a group of people that you've been with for 3, 4, 5 weeks, you may find that you're starting to have a few more conflicts come up than what you normally have with those folks. So today, hopefully, we're going to give you a little insight into how to manage the conflict. Let me start by saying to you, when I first started teaching this at the university level, when the dean called me in and asked me if I would teach a course on conflict resolution, and I said no. Now, those of you that know anything about university culture, when you tell the dean no, especially when the provost is sitting with them, they tend to get a little antsy. And the dean said to me, and just why wouldn't you? And I said, well, because not all conflicts can be resolved, but all conflicts can be managed. So I'll be happy to teach a course called Conflict Management. And then we had a discussion about why am I the kind of person I am, and they knew who I'd been with them for a while. So we are talking about conflict management, not conflict resolution. So the first thing I want to say to you, and I want you to make sure you remember and know, is not all conflicts can be resolved, because resolution means it's done, it goes away. There are some conflicts that we're never going to resolve, but no matter what the conflict is, we can manage it. So today we're going to look at conflicts, we're going to look at causes of conflict, we're going to look at management styles, remembering that we can manage every conflict. So the first point, if you'll go ahead and hit the first bullet point for us, Kevin. Conflict is a natural thing. It happens. It's a part of creation. It's a part of nature. It's a part of any relationship. It's a part of any community. Conflict just happens. Conflict is the existence of things coming together. We see it in nature. We see it all there. So people say, well, I wish we did away with conflict. Well, it's not going to go away. Second point, Kevin. So I want you all to repeat with me. So I want everybody to take it off mute for just a minute. Everybody unmute quickly. Reach down there and unmute everybody. I still see some mute. Unmute. Everybody unmute. Because I want you all with me. So I want you all to repeat after me. Conflict.
Conflict
Is good. Say that again. Conflict
is a good thing.
It's good.
Now, how many of you really believe that?
I do believe that.
I do.
Well, good. There are a few of you then that do believe it. The truth is, conflict is good. People say, I hate conflict. They don't hate conflict. What they hate is conflict mismanagement. Because the things that we think of as being conflict are generally the mismanaged processes and styles that occur from it. The yelling, the screaming, the fighting, the saying nasty things, the destroying of relationships, and all those things aren't conflict. That's conflict mismanagement. And so we want people to begin by understanding conflict's a good thing. Conflict is what causes us to achieve, to move forward. Things coming together and being put together and bringing about new things. So keep that in your mind as we go along. Next point, Kevin. Conflicts arise from numerous things. Go ahead, Kev, give me those points, if you will, real quick. One is culture. Culture is all around us, and culture is in every relationship, every community, everything that we exist. There is a culture. The company you work for has a culture. The family that you were born into has a culture. The family that you currently reside in has a culture. You have a culture that comes from your ethnicity and from your ancestry. You have a work culture. There's a culture in Tucson, Arizona that is different than the culture in Phoenix, Arizona. That's vastly different from the culture that I lived and worked in the Marshall Islands when I was there, which is very different than the culture in Wyoming when I lived and worked there. So we have multiple cultures, and cultures have a way of doing things. And when one culture bumps up against another culture, we have conflict. When an individual of one culture comes up against another culture, they incur cultural conflict. The next one that we have is language. Language is one of the great causes of conflict because language is different for each one of us, even if we speak the same language. I'm speaking the English language, and I'm assuming that everybody on this webinar today understands English. Otherwise, at this moment, you're totally lost because you're not getting anything that I'm saying. Language is a matter not only of the words and the sounds, not only a matter of the intonation, but the matter of the interpretation. So I want all of you for just a moment to, if you have a pen or paper there, I'm going to give you 3 words, and I want you to write down or remember your reaction to these 3 words. Right? I'll give everybody a minute to think about it. All right. So the first one is peanut butter. Peanut butter. The second one, SpongeBob. SpongeBob. And the third is love. Now, I'd like about 4 or 5 people to volunteer to unmute themselves, and when I give the word again, give me your initial response. So if you would do that, if they make sure at least 4 or 5 of you are unmuted and that you're willing to give me your response. There are no right or wrong responses, by the way, no right or wrong ones. They are yours. And I see several people that are unmuted, so I'm going to ask you to please just jump in there. So the first one is peanut butter.
Okay.
Icky.
So we got
Delicious.
icky,
Jelly.
delicious, jelly. All right. Now, the next one is SpongeBob.
My grandkids.
Funny.
Okay. So, and then love.
My spouse.
World.
Okay. Now, we only had 3 or 4 people responding. And see how many different responses we got to the same word. To the very same word, we got all these different responses. Why did we get those different responses? We get those different responses because every word has a meaning to us beyond the dictionary meaning. So when I say to you peanut butter, the first thing that comes to mind is your reaction to peanut butter. Now, somebody said delicious. I happen to think that's probably a very wise person. Somebody said icky. I would suggest you see a counselor because you obviously got a problem. Somebody said jelly, and that's okay, you know. Depends on what kind of jelly you're putting with it. But we have that. SpongeBob elicits all kinds of different reactions. We had one that says my grandchildren, a connection to another relationship. And love, universal, individual. So one of the things that can happen in our language, even within the same spoken language, is that we understand that word differently. And so that can cause conflict simply because we're speaking to each other and we're interpreting those words and interpreting the way it comes across. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. The third one is concepts of normal. The concept of normal. We all have a concept of normal, and tied into normal tends to be right and wrong. So is it all right for you to punch somebody in the arm and call them a blankety blank blank because they're your friend? Is it all right to have shouting matches at each other when you're discussing something? Is it all right for you walking by and seeing somebody's pen on their desk to pick it up and make it yours? Those concepts of normal fit into cultural concepts. They fit into our ethics, our understanding. And you know what? Not everybody thinks that that's normal and okay. And if we forget that not everybody thinks, sees, and remembers and knows things exactly as I do, we end up deciding that they're wrong, or they disagree with me, or they think I'm wrong, or something else, which leads to conflicts. The other is miscommunication. So if I'm your supervisor and I say to you, I'm going to pick on Veronica because she's been with me in a number of things. If I'm your supervisor and I say to you, Veronica, work starts at 9 o'clock. What does that mean?
I'm going to say, is it Mexican time or island time?
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Exactly. And that's a cultural thing that ties into it. And those of you who may not know, there are cultures where on time is 30 minutes after the time you say. There are cultures where on time is 10 or 15 minutes early. There are concepts. A supervisor says, this person, I'm going to write this person up because they're never at work at 9 o'clock. Well, I say to them, did you explain to them what you mean by work at 9 o'clock? Well, everybody knows that 9 o'clock means that you've arrived at 8:50, that you've taken care of everything, and you're at your desk, and your computer is on, and at 9 o'clock you start typing. And I say to them, really? You think everybody knows that, huh? Well, then how come this person walks in the door at 9 o'clock, stops to put their lunch in the lunchroom, hangs up their coat, visits with 2 or 3 other coworkers, and then sits down and gets ready to go to work? Well, the problem is you didn't communicate clearly your expectation and your understanding of what that means. And that's one of the things that leads to workplace conflicts so often, is our different understanding of normal and our different understanding of that. And we don't make it clear to somebody. We just assume they don't care, or we assume they're lazy, or they don't understand, or they don't want to work, or they don't respect my authority, right on down the lines of so many different things. The last one here we have is over time, conflict gets worse. There are people who just say, well, if I just ignore it, it'll go away. Not going to happen. It's not going to go away. And the longer it goes, the worse it gets. So this is a key thing to remember. Let me just, somebody's asked a question. How would you describe the difference between communication and language as factors of conflict? All right. Well, communication and language are two different things. Communication involves nonverbals. It involves settings. It involves environment, as well as the use of either words or writing, any way we use words. Language is the communication through words of an idea and of concept. So what happens is we can have different understanding of those words, of what they mean, or we are working in a language that we're really not conversant in, and we mispronounce a word, we misuse a word. Communication is the broader sense of all of the things that tie into it. We're going to talk in a little bit about it, but only 7 to 11% of what we communicate is in the words we use. Study after study shows only 7 to 11% of what we communicate is in our language, is in our words. The rest of it is in our nonverbals, in our tone, in the rate, in all of the other things that we use with it. Nonverbals are really a powerful, powerful way of communicating. So if I say to you, wow, I'm really interested in what you're saying, Brianna. Okay, Brianna, I'm really interested in what you're saying. Go ahead, please continue to talk to me. Brianna, would you say I just communicated two different things to you with the same words?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because I just communicated two totally different things and I used the same words. So thank you for that question, because that is a very powerful thing that we all need to remember. That communication and language are not, they're tied, but they're not the same. I can communicate all sorts of things without a word. Let me see if I can communicate a couple of things to you. Anybody have an idea what I'm communicating to you there?
That you couldn't see the screen?
You're
Let me
hungry.
try it. What's that? Angry, yeah.
You're
How about this one?
hungry.
How about this one?
Nap time.
Yeah, nap time. Somebody knows me well. How about this? Can you see?
Angry or annoyed.
You're in disgust.
Being discussed. Yeah. So without a word, I can communicate all kinds of things. And that's the thing we have to remember, is that in various cultures as well, going back to culture, certain ways of sitting, certain ways of movement can also communicate a lot of things. When diplomats are trained to go to the Middle East, one of the first things they're told is, do not cross your legs, gentlemen, when you're sitting with folks in the Middle East. Do you know why? Anyone know why?
I mean, I'm assuming it's a cultural.
It's a cultural thing, because in the Middle East, in Arabic cultures, to show somebody the sole of your foot is the equivalent of calling them a dog or a slave. So you can imagine, you're trying to communicate to somebody, you're trying to have a discussion with them, and all of a sudden you cross your leg and the sole of your foot is showing. You just said to that person, I don't respect you. So those are the kind of things that can happen to us culturally as well, with symbols that have nothing to do with the words we're using. So we have to be aware of that and come to understand that. And so we have to watch for signals, nonverbal signals from the other person. Any other comments or thoughts before I move to the next slide? So I'm going to quickly flash through. If this is resonating, how about showing me a thumbs up or a nod or something so that I know you're with me? Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm seeing most of the folks are there. So I generally have a thing that I say to students when I'm teaching. This means yes, I'm with you. This means no, I don't know. This means I haven't got an idea in the world of what you're talking about. So that's one of the problems with this sort of thing, is more difficult for me to know whether you're with me, but I want to make sure that what I'm saying is resonating and you're understanding me, because we're talking about communication and talking about conflict management. Kevin, if you'll give me the next slide, please. All right, there are three things that always make conflict worse. There are three key things, and this is one of the things I really hope that you will get and remember and be able to use. The first one is the need to be right. So is there anybody on this thing that woke up this morning and said, man, I hope I'm wrong today. Please let me be wrong today. I want to be wrong about everything I do. It's not, this isn't the case. Now, if we know something, if we're anticipating something bad to happen and we say, well, I hope I'm wrong about that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that basic need that we all have to be right. I need to be right. And one of the problems with that, why does that cause conflict?
You're not open to listening to the information that other people are giving you.
That's one of the things. And we have, many times we have this concept that if I'm right and you don't agree with me, what does that mean?
You're wrong.
You're wrong. And now all of a sudden, if I think you're indicating to me that I'm wrong, or I'm indicating you wrong, we've got a conflict. We've got a conflict that started already. The second one, it needs to be heard. Every human being needs to feel that they have a voice. One of the most difficult things that leads to conflict is people feeling that they're not being listened to, they're not being heard. And there's a difference between being heard and being listened to. I can listen to the words, I can hear you, but if I'm really listening, am I giving you credence and paying attention to what you're doing and what you're saying? I would guess that almost everybody on this webinar has at one time or another felt that somebody just totally disregarded what they were saying, and what they were saying didn't mean a thing to them. Even though the person's saying, I really want your opinion. Kevin, I really want your opinion on what we're going to do tomorrow. And then Kevin starts talking, and I give him all kinds of things that don't indicate that I have anything to do with it. You went to another slide, Kev. Can you go back, please? There we go, right there. So the need to be heard, I mean, really heard. And one of the difficulties, one of the biggest challenges is that for folks, that when we feel we aren't heard, it leads to all kinds of conflicts. And the third one is the need to be seen as we see ourselves. We all have a self-image. We all have an image of ourselves, whatever that image is, and we really need to have people, a need for people to see us as we see ourselves. Now, when people see us differently than we see ourselves, we have a conflict going on. This is not always a conflict because people don't see us as good as we see ourselves. It's often for people with a low self-esteem and a poor image that people keep telling us things about ourselves that we don't believe. I happen to live with a spouse who is brilliant, talented, and who has struggled with self-esteem her entire life. And people have told her forever and ever how brilliant she is. And in her own image, she's this poor person who doesn't know anything, can't do anything right. She's done a lot of work on it to get a whole lot better over a lot of years, but it still can rear its head and it becomes a problem. It can lead to conflict. So that need to be seen as we see ourselves, either in a positive or if we see ourselves in a negative light, we see ourselves as capable, we see ourselves incapable, whatever it is, and that can vary. So Kevin, who works with me and who's doing a brilliant job of running the screen for me because he does technology far better than I do, is trained as an engineer. He's very good at those kind of detailed and technical things. He really is, and he knows he is. But if all of a sudden I, as his supervisor, start explaining to him in detail how to do technical things, Kevin, how does that make you feel? Go ahead and say it. Don't move the screen yet. Well, you put the screen back. Put back the slide.
It makes me feel stupid.
Yeah, and you don't think of yourself as stupid, do you?
No.
Yeah, he doesn't see himself as a stupid person, but now we've got a conflict going because I don't see him as he sees himself. And so we can end up with that. Now we're to this slide, Kevin. So looking at the first three. So now go to the next slide, please. And the first item on that is culture. So if you'll give me a hit there. In every culture, we have do's and don'ts. There are things that you do in a culture. There are things you don't do in a culture. I'll give you an example. I grew up in a family with my brother, my mother, and father. And the way we had family discussions was we would all take a corner of the room and we yell towards the middle. Some of you may be able to relate to that. I married a woman who came out of a family culture where if there were a fire in the house, somebody would go, "Excuse me, I think the house is on fire. Maybe we should do something about it." I don't know if you could hear me. I hope my mic picked that up. But it was very much a culture of quiet and of soft-spokenness. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody yelled. And when we first got married, that would say to me, "Why are you yelling at me all the time?" And I said, "I'm not yelling. I'm just making my point." Because in her culture, you don't raise your voice. In my culture, if you didn't raise your voice, you weren't trying to say anything. That's rather simplistic because there are a lot more complicated things in our cultures. One of the challenges that can happen when you come into a relationship with anyone is out of their culture, there are certain ways you act and certain ways you don't. And there are do's and don'ts. And so we can find ourselves in conflict because we don't understand the do's and don'ts from this other culture. Make sense? With me? Let me see those heads nod. Let me see those thumbs. Let me see those indicators that they're either I'm making my points or I should go away. Okay, thank you. The second one, the next point, Kevin. One of the things in cultures that every culture has an understanding of resources. One of the things that if we have a culture that understands there's plenty of resources, there's lots of things available to everybody, we're good at sharing. We come out of a culture where there's a view that there's limited resources and there's not really enough to go around, we have more of a challenge with sharing. So my earlier example of I have a pen on my desk, somebody walks by and takes my pen to use it. It could be a cultural thing that, wait a minute, there aren't enough pens in this office to be used. Now I don't have a pen. That's a problem. And I know I'm being a little hyperbolic on that, but I'm hoping you're following, you're tracking with me. So in every culture, there's a concept of whether there's enough to go around or not, and that can impact it. One of the things that when the missionaries went into the Hawaiian Islands, in the Hawaiian culture, if something was in your area and it was just there, like if a pig wandered into your yard, your kuleana, it was your pig. Even though it may have belonged to somebody else back there, but it came over there, well, it's yours, so you can do with it what you want. Or if there's you walk along and you find somebody's book laying on the ground and nobody's around, you pick it up, it becomes your book. Well, that certainly wasn't the culture of these New England Puritan pastors who came in. And so they decided that the Hawaiians were all thieves and liars. And it wasn't that they were all thieves and liars, it's that they were functioning in two different cultures with two different do's and don'ts and two different concepts of resources. Because in the Hawaiian culture, everything belonged to the gods anyway. And in that Puritan New England culture, if it's mine, and keep your hands off it. So this can be an area of real culture. So we need to understand that. Next point, Kevin. Goals. Our understanding of goals. Every culture has goals. What your achievement is, what you should do, where you should go, how you want to get there, and where you're going. And different cultures have different concepts of goals and different goals that are set for folks. And those challenges of meeting those goals can become a real source of conflict. Next point. Styles. There are different styles of operation and of management. Do you come out of a close culture or do you come out of a distant culture? Every culture has a concept of personal space. And if we were doing this in a group, I would select somebody and I would give them the joy of having me walk up, right up, and keep getting closer and closer to them until they backed away or put their hands up to say, whoa, that's enough. Because we all have that. And in different cultures, you have different spaces. You have different concepts of space. And so that can be, and different styles of operation, different styles of dress. There are cultures that people come out of where you need to be covered from your neck to your ankles. There are some cultures where women need to be covered from their head to their toes. There are cultures where it's okay to be very scantily clad. My wife and I were in charge of youth ministries for a denomination for a number of years. And in that denomination, we had summer camps. And we hired employees from our denomination, from the community, and from even from Europe. And on the first day of staff training of one of these times, we had everybody go to the swimming pool. We were going to do things on the swimming pool and how to manage the pool and how to manage your children around the pool. And everybody was there, and all of a sudden we looked up, and these two young people from France were coming down towards the pool. To say that they had on minor pieces of cloth would be about the best you could say for their swim costumes. It was not what would be acceptable in that culture of that denomination and in much of the United States culture at that time for appropriate swimwear there. But in France, that was the way, that was fine. It was perfectly acceptable. So styles can make a lot of it. There's a question somebody just brought up. I worked for an attorney who would grab food from my lunch as he walked by. He did it to everyone and said his family did it that way with no qualms. Yeah, there's a perfect example. Now, I'm guessing you weren't too happy with him grabbing the food out of grabbing your lunch and others. Yeah, in his family, that was fine. That's normal. That's good. That's okay. But it's not in everybody. Now, all of a sudden, because you're thinking, well, it was good enough for me, it fits my culture, it's going to fit everybody else's. It isn't, and it's going to lead to complications, and it's going to lead to conflict. And we need to learn how to manage that. Next point, Kevin. Values. Every culture has values, and every culture values certain things. Some cultures value education. Some cultures value hard work. Some cultures value acquisition. Some cultures value generosity. They have different values. Some cultures believe that not have intimate physical relationships with anyone outside of the bonds of marriage. Some cultures believe that it's perfectly fine if you're in a relationship with someone to have whatever kind of physical relationship comes with it. Now, you can see just with those two, without going into a lot of other values, how that leads to conflicts. All right, Kevin, next point. Time. Veronica kind of addressed this earlier in our talks. So every culture has the concept of time. Kathy Swagger, if you can unmute for a minute, I'm going to pick on you. I'll see if I can find you. There you are. Kathy, in Germany, if you're going to get on the 5 o'clock train to somewhere, what time should you be on that train?
About 4:45 at the latest.
Why is that, Kathy?
Because there's a lot of people getting on the train. You want to make sure you get a seat.
And what time is that train leaving?
On the dot.
On the dot. Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Kathy. That's right. You're in Germany. The trains run on time. It's an old cliche, but it's true. It's at 5 o'clock, that train is moving. If you're not on it before 5 o'clock, you're in trouble. And as Kathy said, a lot of people get on the train. You want to be there at 4:45. If you're not on it by 4:50, by 4:59, you're going to miss the train. Now, if you're in Hawaii and the meeting starts at 1 o'clock and it's local time, what time is that meeting probably going to start? Anybody want to take a guess? Yeah, as Kathy says, my wife and I pastored in Hawaii for many years. And one time the bishop of that denomination was bringing a very high-ranking person from the denomination over for a series of meetings. And he said, we're going to come to your church on the island of Maui. And I said, why? I said, the bigger church is on Oahu. You need to go and stay on Oahu. Keep him there. No, and I said, well, why are you coming here? He said, because you're the only person I know who can get his colleagues, his mainland people and his island people all there at the same time. I said, I can tell you the secret. I tell my people from the mainland that it starts at 1:30. I tell my people from Hawaii that it starts at 12:30. And guess what? They're all there at 1 o'clock. So again, part of the concept is time is different in different cultures. I have friends that I know, if I tell them we're going to be somewhere at 1 o'clock, you know what time they leave their house? 1 o'clock.
Oh.
And it's a half hour away. So I know they're going to be 15, 20 or minutes or a half hour later than I am when I get there. Just a reality. If you tell me we're supposed to be somewhere at 1 o'clock, I will probably be there at 12:50. Just the concept of what time means. All right, Kevin, hit the next one for us, please. Okay, language, go ahead. The first point under language. Meaning, again, we talked a little bit about this, so I'm going to go through this one fairly quickly. Oh, somebody's just put up a note. Some people have, they don't have their mute on, and we're hearing lots of background noise. So if there's background noise, please go ahead and mute yourself. Feel free to unmute to speak, but please, because we're getting a lot of background noise. Thank you. Go ahead, the next point, Kevin. Concepts. Again, the concepts we've talked about. The next one, please, Kevin. Humor. Now, this is one of the things that is really important for us to understand in managing our communication and maintaining control of conflict. Jokes do not translate well across cultures, and humor is one of those things comedians will tell you. To try to translate a joke into another language is so difficult. And what you find in your culture humorous, I can guarantee you falls flat to other cultures. It's one of the things that in teaching sexual harassment prevention that I've always said to people is, because you and Uncle Bob think it's funny, I can guarantee you a whole lot of other people won't find it funny. So where we think we're joking, where we think we're being humorous, a lot of times we can offend people if we're not careful. To watch and make sure that we understand, and don't expect that the humor that comes out of, or the style of humor that comes out of your cultures fits with the cultures of everybody else. Next point, Kevin. Relational orientation. Again, we talked a little bit about that. How do I relate to you? What is the orientation? What's the physical orientation? What are the stretches? And how do I relate people to people with language in a hierarchy, in a structure? How do I speak to people who are in leadership as opposed to people who are on the same level as I am? What's the expectation? How should that be done? Again, to give you an example, I was on a command team, and one day we had a person who was doing marvelous work in a place, but the leaders were all complaining that this gentleman said yes to them, but then didn't do what he said he was going to do. And they were all upset about that. And I said to them, what culture does he come out of? And he had come out of a South American culture. And I said, in that culture, would you ever say no to the person in authority? And they thought about it. And I said, no, you wouldn't. Just culturally, you would never say no. So you say yes. But yes means I respect your authority. I hear you. I understand what you're saying to me. But yes doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to do what you tell me. So one of the things we have to understand, and we have to come to understand and make sure we get a handle on, is the relational orientation that people have. In many cultures, is your culture hierarchical, or is it a flat culture? Is it a segmented culture, or is it not? Is it a divided culture where there's one way of relating to women, another way of relating to men, another way of relating to children? Those are all things that are a part of, can cause conflict. Next point, Kevin. Personal space. I talked about that a little while ago. Everybody has a concept of personal space. When I was pastoring churches, I was a hugging pastor. And in the last formal congregation that I pastored, we had about 450 people on a Sunday morning. And so I generally hugged 449 people, because I had one person in my congregation whose personal space was probably about 40 feet. If you're 40 feet away from me, that's close enough. So I would greet her by saying good morning with my hands behind me across the sanctuary and kind of acknowledging that. So again, one of the things we got to be careful of is an understanding of personal space. Okay, Kevin, go ahead. So go ahead to the first point of that. Normal practices. Again, we talked a little bit about this. What are normal practices? What is normal? How do you behave? What do you do normally? What time do you eat? How do you eat? What are these sort of things? As the thing was brought up, is it okay to walk by people and take food off their plate? These are the practices, normal practices. What time do you get up? What time do you do? How do you do these things? Next point. Views of life and, I'm sorry, I've got that. Let me bring it up. I'm not reading my own thing here. Oh yeah, views of life and the other. What does life mean? What is life about? And the other, that person who isn't you, how do you view them? In some cultures, anyone who is not of us is perceived as being hostile. In other cultures, everybody is viewed as being friendly until you know otherwise. Is that other person of the same value as you? If you grew up in India, there's a caste system. Now it's been done away with, but my Indian friends will tell me it's still there in many places. And people of this upper class don't have anything to do with this person down here. Now, for many people in their cultures, that's just an anathema. How could you possibly be that way? But it's, again, understanding of how we should do life, what life is here for, what is the reason for life, why do we exist? These are all parts of things that are built into the normalcy of our understanding. Next, Kevin. The value of the individual or the community. So in your culture, is the individual more important or the community more important? If you are the traditional born and raised in the United States, the underlying ethos of the United States tends to be, it's about the individual. It's about the individual, and you pull yourself up by your bootstrap and whatever you can get and however I can get there. And it's about me first. There are a lot of cultures where that's not the case, where it's about the larger community, the value of the individual. We see sometimes that in places around the world, where the value of an individual human life doesn't seem to be that much. It's because the larger view of that culture, the normal view, is about the whole rather than the individual. But we have cultures like the United States where it tends to be about the individual more than the culture. Now, within that broad culture, there are smaller cultures, as I say, that have different aspects, different understandings, different approaches. But it's a key thing to understand. Next point, Kevin. So then we have family and community practices. What's the value? How does the family interact? How important is the family? What do you do in community? What don't you do in community? How do communities come together? Again, out of my own experience, when I was responsible for youth ministry in all of Southern California for a denomination, we had a big meeting once a month, and people would come from all the churches. A couple thousand people would be there. And part of my responsibility and that of my youth team was to provide meetings and programs for children. And the boss called me in one day and said, "Why aren't these kids going to the children's meetings?" And I said, "Well, which kids are you talking about, sir?" He said, "The kids from the Hispanic churches. They're not going. They're up there and they're making noise and they're being there and they should be there." And I said, "Sir, you're talking about a cultural thing, because to these folks, the children should be worshiping with their parents as a family and community. They're not going to go to that group. Our Anglos are going to go because that's part of the culture." So it was leading to a conflict there. Fortunately, we were able to have a conversation and resolve it. But it's the kind of thing that happens, how families interact, how families are seen, what they do, and understanding. How many of you, and you don't have to have hands, but how many of you say at work, "We're a family. We're a family. We're a family together"? You know, for some people, that can be a wonderful image. But all families are wonderful, and some families are pretty closed and insular, and they think, no, you're not my family, you're my workmates. And that can lead to a problem when there's conflict, when we're trying to treat everybody like family and somebody doesn't feel that way. Or we talk about being their family and they came out of a family that was extremely dysfunctional and all kinds of issues. So we have to be aware, we have to think about those things because they can open doors for us. Any thoughts or comments before we move to the next area? All right, Kevin, give us the next slide, please. Go ahead and hit the button. So when we are managing conflict, there are 5 standard traditional methods of managing conflict. All of them, I will start out by saying to you, all of them are right and appropriate times, and all of them are wrong and inappropriate times. So the first one is competing. Don't put any more up, Kev, please. Competing. Competing is an I win, you lose. That means I'm coming at this conflict, I'm coming at this difference, and I'm telling you I'm right, and you're going to be it my way, and I'm going to do everything I can to win because that's there. Now, there may be some things in your life, and there's some things that you're right and the other approach is wrong. But you need to understand that competing about that means that the other person is going to lose, or you're going to lose. Somebody's going to lose. And that in itself can lead to resentment, can lead to other things. So you want to make sure if you're going to use competition, you're competing, you want to make sure that what you're competing about when it comes to a conflict is something that really is so important, so correct, so morally and ethically perfect that you just have to win. The second one here is collaborating. And collaborating says I win and you win. True collaboration means that everybody gets exactly what they're looking for. Now, collaboration is tough, and collaboration takes time. Collaboration always means that you come up with a third alternative that helps people to get what they're looking for, and you get what you're looking for, and everybody walks away and says, wow, I won, they won, we all won. The example that I use often is a couple who are getting ready to go on vacation. She wants to go and lay by water where it's warm and read and sip her favorite drink and just relax. He wants to go climb mountains and exercise and achieve great things and test himself against the mountain. Now, they've got a problem here, don't they? Because you can't really climb a mountain laying on a lounge chair sipping your favorite drink. And you really can't climb a mountain except in your mind if you're laying by the pool. So they sit down and they begin to think about it. And suddenly, as they're thinking about it, they start discussing, well, what do you really want? What do you want? Why do you want to lay around the pool? Why, instead of arguing about it, they're looking for the key points to come down to what the person's really looking for. What she's really looking for is peace, quiet, and relaxation. What he's looking for is stimulation and a challenge. And so they look at it and they say, you know what? I realize if we go to this resort near this mountain, they have a wonderful lakeside area. It's wonderful weather. And just down the road that I can even see from that pool is a mountain that you could climb. And by collaborating, they didn't go to Hawaii. They didn't go to Kilimanjaro. They went to another place where both of them could actually get exactly what they were looking for in a different place. That's true collaboration. Collaboration is wonderful, but you don't always have time. You don't always have time because it does require time of sitting down. But if you can manage the time, if you can understand and sit where the conflict is, whether it's between teams, between companies, between individuals, and begin to really spend the time and really dig down to find out what the reality of what people are looking for. It is the one where everybody wins. The next one, Kevin. Avoiding. And avoiding is, I lose, you win. I just avoid the confrontation. I walk away and I just throw my hands up and say, yeah, that's fine, whatever. This generally doesn't resolve anything. And if it's good in the short term where you don't have time to really work things out, or if you're in a situation where you find yourself in a conflict with somebody that you're not going to be around, chances are you may never even see them again. You're not going to have anything to do with them. Avoiding the conflict is just fine, saying, let it go, let it go. But if they're people that you're going to be in regular reaction with, you're going to be working with, you're going to be dealing with regularly, avoiding it in the short term because you don't have time to work on it, or because it's a very hot issue and because people are too emotional and that sort of thing, then avoidance for a short time is a positive thing. But it means that there's a loser and there's a winner. Next one, Kev. Accommodating. I lose and you win. That's where I give in to you. I say, okay, whatever you want, and I mean it sincerely. I'm going to give it to you, and that sort of thing. That's okay if it's not a real core issue with you, and if you can truly live with it. But the problem is if you use accommodating all the time as your conflict management style, pretty soon you get tired of accommodating. Because remember what we said at the beginning: everybody needs to have a voice. Everybody needs to be heard. Everybody needs to be right. Those things are going to, if you're always accommodating, you're not being seen as you want to be seen, you're not being right, and you're not being heard. So it's going to eventually lead to some resentment, not really dealing with the conflict, and pretty soon there's going to be a bigger conflict, and probably at some point a lot of the things that we think of as conflict that are the mismanagement of conflict that lead to problems, or the death of a relationship. Next one, Kev. Did you put up the last one, Kev? Thank you. Before I jump to that, there's a note just came up, said, I can be very, very angry with beneficiaries who haven't seen or cared for the loved one prior to death, but they are right there demanding the money immediately. Greed is not good ever, but neither is my resentment. Yeah, so, you know, that's a tough one, because we do see, again, values. There's the difference of values, the difference of normal, the difference of what is right and what we receive. So it's a great example of how these things can lead to that. Now, managing that conflict that you have, managing that, you look at these things and say, am I going to ever have anything to do with these people again? Maybe one where you avoid it. It may be if you think there's a situation where you're going to maybe dealing with their family members and other people again, it's a chance then maybe just look at trying to have a conversation with them and trying to understand. And maybe taking the time to sit down and listen and understand why they are the way they are. Very few things are just out of whole cloth that don't have a history to them. So the last one on our 5 is compromising. And people think compromising is a win-win, but I and many of my colleagues tell you it's a lose-lose. The reason is you're losing because everybody's giving up something. Everybody's giving up something and kind of meeting in the middle. It's different than collaboration, because collaboration, you're working together to come up with a third alternative that everybody gets what they want, or what they need. Compromise is, I'm willing to give up this much and you give up that much. I'm really not totally happy, but I can live with it. And so that's why we call it a lose-lose. It can be very effective, but it's not as helpful for the relationship as collaborating usually. Any thoughts, any questions before we jump to the next section? All right, Kevin, if you'll give us the next slide. Yeah, and these are just pictures of that, and when you get the material, you'll have those. So go ahead to the next slide, Kev. So this is a little technique that I want to teach you. One of my colleagues came up with it, STLC. STLC, it's a great way to manage yourself and manage the situation and really come to preventing the behaviors and the expressions and even often the conflict or what's perceived as a conflict. So we say the first thing we talk about is stop. So let me ask you the question. Now it's kind of a little different thing here in this COVID-19 culture that we're living in. But in your pre-COVID-19 life, how often did you stop, really stop during the day? You know, just stop everything. So if we were doing this, I would have you all stand up and I would have you close your eyes and I would have you attempt to stop everything. Stop thinking, keep breathing. We don't want you to fall over and faint, but just stop. Just stop, really stop. And just let everything settle. Go ahead and give us the next point, Kevin, because there should be some points under stop. Then you begin to think. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, next point. Yeah, so you stop everything, you breathe. Just take a couple of centering breaths, what we call centering breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Just kind of relax. Next point, Kev. Okay. So we then stop and then we think. Then we think. So we think of who is this? Who's this that I'm talking to? Who's this that come into my office? Who am I relating to? Is this somebody who is normally hyperactive and loud and boisterous and jumps around and everything? Somebody who's normally very quiet and staid. And how are they now? How are they coming at me? How are they coming this way? The other thing is think about, how do I feel? Am I hot? Am I tired? Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I afraid? Think about where you are. Think about all your filters. And what is going on around me? What's the environment? Where am I? What's happening? Is it too hot in this room? Is the air conditioning too high? Is the light not good? So what you're doing is aligning all of your filters, because we all have our filters that we live with. And we get them aligned, and we see everything through our filters. We hear everything through our filters. Our filters are what are constantly at work. And so we get a thing and we make sure we got all of our filters aligned. We understand where they are. We understand what's going on. And then we start to listen. So Kevin, the first point are listening. Now you focus on the other. See, your first thing has been to really check yourself and check all your filters and get yourself together. Now you focus on that other person, observing them, observing how they are, observing what they're doing. Remember, we need to observe the nonverbals too. And then we practice active listening. Active listening, really listening, not thinking about something else, not formulating my response, but actually listening. David Augsburger, who was the dean of psychology, Fuller Seminary in Southern California, in writing at one point said, the feeling of being truly listened to, is so akin to that of being loved that most of us cannot tell the difference. Most of us cannot tell the difference. So when we listen, and if you think about it, think about people who you know who really listen to you, who focus on you when you're talking to them and really listening to you. I would guarantee you there aren't any of them that you don't feel pretty good about. So we don't allow ourselves to start formulating a reply. We don't think about that. We're listening to them and trying to understand what the words are and what they're saying. So the next point, Kevin. Stay in that moment. Focus, really focus. For some of you, that's easier than for others. But stay in that moment, focused on them, focused on the nonverbals, focused on the tone, focused on the words. And then we move to communicate. First point under communication, Kevin. So then you clarify that you actually heard what you think you heard. Remember back to where we were talking about language. So did you really hear, did I hear what you said? Did you say what I think you said? What you said, does it mean what I think it means? Because remember, we all have a different understanding of what that word means, of each word and what it means. And if we assume that the way I understand that word and what it means to you are the same, we may have a problem. So clarify it. Make sure that the tone and nonverbals match your words. So don't say, I really care about you. Yeah, I really care about you. Okay, Iona, I care about you. I care about what you're saying to me. Yeah, right. Oh yeah, it's very important. I can guarantee you that what I was just doing with my head in that is negating anything I would say. The tone was negating anything that I would say that might be of a caring, positive nature. So make sure that your nonverbals are there. Make sure that you're open, you're aware, you're listening, that you're receiving what they're saying and clarifying, feeding back, feeding back. What I heard you say. Now I understand, Brianna, that what you're telling me, so that I make sure that I understand that we're using the same words, that we're communicating. What I'm communicating, what you're communicating, what I'm communicating, the same thing. My wife and I, just the other day, were having these two wonderful conversations together. We thought they were the same conversation, but they weren't. We were having two different conversations because the word that had gotten used, I was taking in one way and she was taking it another way. And we laughed about it, got it straightened around. But that's what you want to make sure you do. Next point, Kevin. Ask to make sure that you were understood. That's the other thing. Not only do you ask for clarification, do you make sure that they clarify that what you heard, what they were saying, but make sure that they understand what you're saying. So it doesn't hurt to say, Brianna, tell me, what did you just hear me say? Please share with me what you heard me say. So that, again, I make sure, because I can't tell you how many times I've said that to somebody and what they said was not what I meant to say. And now we're setting up the possibility of having a problem. And when you're dealing with those of you that are caregivers, those of you that are social workers, that are chaplains, that are attorneys, whatever you are, make sure that you're really understanding, because you're trying to work with these folks and making sure that you understand that they're saying what you think they're saying and that they understand what you're saying, because it can lead to so many problems. Next slide. Any questions on that before we jump to the next slide? All right, Kev, give us the next slide. Now, we're going to talk for a couple of minutes about I versus you statements, and this is powerfully important. First point, Kev. I language is the language of de-escalation. So if you find yourself in a tense situation, you find yourself in a difficult situation, the use of I language de-escalates that, because you is an aggressive word. And when we use the term you, we immediately put people on the defensive. So I understand what I understand. I need you to know what I'm feeling, what I understand, what I sense becomes about me, not about the other person. And so if there's a misunderstanding, guess what? It puts it on me, not on you. And so you don't have to be defensive because we're not understanding each other. Go ahead, the next question, Kev. Next point. As I said, you is an attacking word, defensive. And when we feel defensive, when we feel attacked, what do? We run, bunker, or retaliate. We run away, we shut down, we close off, we leave, we can finish the conversation, we leave the job, we quit the relationship, we bunker, we build a fortress around ourselves, or we retaliate. We attack back because you just attacked me, now I'm going to attack you, and so we end up with an arms race. An I statement is a statement of feeling, and it makes it yours again, as I said. It's mine. And to argue with my feelings is really irrational, and most people will get that. That it's again, I put the onus on me. That means that you're taking responsibility. That is a very grown-up, very mature, very wise, and very de-escalating approach to take on things. You is a statement that assumes you know what the other feels and intends. And that's a dangerous thing. When I all of a sudden decide I know what you're thinking, I know for sure what you mean, I know where you're coming from. Do any of us really, truly ever know what's going on inside somebody else? Not really. Because we don't know. No matter how well you know that person. They come to work and you know all about them, but you didn't know that their significant other told them that they want a divorce, or that their child's just been diagnosed with some terminal disease, or they got a speeding ticket on the way to work. And all those things are going on inside, and you don't know that. I opens the door and affords an escape for the other. So if this person comes at you and they're prepared to fight and they're prepared to attack you and everything else, and you go to I statements and bring it back on your feeling and those sort of things, you give them the opportunity of backing away, of escaping, of leaving the situation and still save face. Okay. Any questions, any thoughts, any comments on that? Some of you probably are very good practitioners of I language because it's been taught for a long time, and it's an extremely effective communication tool. A key to know, one of the key, yeah, this is a real important thing that I want to put on here. There is a book called Nonviolent Communication, The Language of Love by Rosenberg, by Dr. Rosenberg. I would recommend it to any of you, in fact, to all of you. And in it, one of the key things that he talks about while talking about these is that there's a key that we need to know within ourselves whether we are observing or judging. And there's a difference between observation and judgment. So when someone is doing something in their culture, or they're talking, or they're about themselves, are we observing them or are we judging them? When we move to judgment, we set ourselves up for confrontation. We set ourselves up for conflict. We set ourselves up for all kinds of issues. Now, that's not to say judgment is wrong. There are times where we are called upon to judge and where we need to make judgments. We need to make calls. But an awful lot of the time, what we really need to be doing to de-escalate situations and to practice good communication, practice good conflict management, is to truly observe without making a judgment. And so one of the keys in managing conflict and managing situations is to make sure you understand what you're doing. Am I observing? Am I just being aware of what's going on? Or am I judging because it seems different or wrong to me? That's a key point. And it's a powerful one. When you can move to the point where you are constantly being aware of whether you are judging or observing, you will find that it helps you to move in a much stronger, much more peaceful, much more powerful way in all of your actions and reactions, and in all your dealings in business, your personal life, social life, the community, and the world. So again, I recommend the book, Nonviolent Communication, The Language of Love by Rosenberg. And if you want more information on that, you send me an email. My email is mflag@harmonyhospice.org. And we'll probably send that out when we send out the copy of this material for you. But please, if you have other questions, you can send me a note and I'll be glad to respond. Or if you need information on that book or other materials. Go ahead, Kevin, let's go to the next slide. One of the other keys in conflict management is learning forgiveness. Forgiveness is not the simplistic thing that we often think it is. And there are actually 3 stages, 3 R's, if you will, to forgiveness. The first stage is forgive. And forgiveness is about you and it's not about the other. One of the mistakes that is often made in life is we say, well, I'm not going to forgive them unless they apologize. Well, forgiveness is not about justice. It's not about retribution. Forgiveness is about pardon. And so forgiveness is about us. Forgiveness releases us from the hurt, from being tied and chained to the brokenness of whatever caused us to be hurt. Now, that's easier sometimes with the more difficult, the more heinous the problem, the more hurtful the problem, the more difficult it is to do that. But what we're really doing with forgiveness is coming up to say, you know I have a right to retribution. I have a right to justice. I have a right to punish you. But forgiveness says, you know what? I give up that right. I let it go. Because as long as we can't forgive, we're tied to that event, that time, and that situation. It's much more, if we were in a stand-up situation, I would draw on the board a stick figure with a ball and chain attached to its leg. And as long as we can't move to forgive, to letting go of that, we're tied to that. And it impacts all of our decisions. It impacts all of our relationships. It impacts how we do our life. But when we can truly forgive, when we can let go of that and say, you know what? Yes, I was wronged. Yes, I was hurt. Yes, I did not deserve it. Yes, that other person should be punished. But you know what? Punishing them is not going to do a thing to change it. Punishing them is not going to avoid my hurt. I might think it is, but it's really not. Punishment is not doing anything. It's not going to help. So you know what? I let them go. I let them get off scot-free. I pardon them. And that's what pardoning is. If you are in the judicial system and you receive a pardon, it means it never happened. It's gone. And so we say, we let go of it, we cut it out, we get ourselves away from it, we let go of it. I think there's another point or two on that under forgiveness, Kevin. So, and somebody said culture certainly frames ideas of forgiveness, and it does, and that's one of the things that goes into culture. And whether we are a culture of forgiveness or we're a culture of justice, justice and forgiveness aren't the same thing. Justice says you get what you deserve, what you've earned. Forgiveness says, yeah, you should be punished, but you know what? I'm not going to punish you. You get away with it. It's tough. It's a tough thing, especially where it's hard, but it frees us from it. So the second stage is reconciliation. That's the next point, Kev. Now, reconciliation is where we come back into restarting the association, the relationship. It begins by bringing both parties together. Now, before I go any further, I want to say there are times where we should not reconcile with someone who has been harmful to us, who has hurt us. If they are a toxic individual who causes pain and causes us hurt and is this type of person that is going to inflict more pain in that and is truly a toxic individual, we want to forgive them because it sets us free, but doesn't mean we necessarily want to reconcile with them. So reconciliation, though, where it's not a toxic person, where it's not been a totally toxic relationship, and we want to make that, we get together, we begin to, and it allows for community, allows us to come back and begin to have a relationship, begin to work together. Next point, Kev. And it starts with the rebuilding of trust. Anytime that a relationship is broken, anytime there's harm and there's pain, it impacts trust. And we learn that we can't trust this person again. So we begin to build trust. And we begin to rebuild trusting them and beginning on little bits at a time. You know, you take, it's how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? How do you rebuild trust? One step at a time, one little thing at a time. Now, where you can reconcile, the third step is the beautiful step that quite often doesn't happen in really, really difficult situations, but where it can, it's a wonderful thing. Restoration. And restoration really is the development of an entire new relationship. It comes from reaching the point, again, of total trust. And that means we have to get past a lot of things. Next point, Kev. It allows to write a whole new relationship, and it takes great trust. Next point. So restoration quite often doesn't happen, but it's an ideal when it can get there. but it takes great work and it takes hard work. So we've now reached that point of questions that you have. So you can bring up that question screen, Kevin, and you can either quickly give me a Zoom chat question or unmute and ask a question. I have one more thing to talk to you about if we don't have any questions before we let you go. All right, Kevin, go ahead and give me the next slide, if you will. Oh, it's not there. Okay, it's not there because I didn't send you the revision I did. So let me talk without that. You will have all received a objectives check sheet. And the objectives check sheet has, I believe, 6 questions on it that are key questions. It's kind of your exam, if you will. For those of you who wish to get the CEU credit for taking this course, you must complete that and return it to Kenya. Kenya Romero, who is the one who sent you all this material. And to receive the CEU, again, you must complete that and return it to her. All the material questions in it are objectives that we've talked about, and hopefully I've emphasized them enough that they all resonate with you. So again, please make sure you complete that objective check sheet, return it to Kenya so that you can get your CEUs, because if you don't, you won't. So let me say thank you for being with us. Thank you for this. It is my sincerest hope that this has been helpful, will be helpful to you, that it will help you in your work, in your personal life, in your community, and that this time has been meaningful for you. If you have questions, again, I'm going to give this to you. My email is mflagg@harmonyhospice.org. Again, mflagg@harmonyhospice.org. Please feel free to shoot me a note if you want any information on the Rosenberg book or any other information, or if you have questions you want answered, or if there are other materials you are interested in, please let me know and I will respond to you as quickly as possible.
Hey, Murray, can you hear me?
Yes.
Steve Nason here.
Yes, Steve.
Could I get the address for Kenya Romero, please?
Kenya Romero is KR. Kenya, are you still on?
Yes. If
You
you
wanna give up-
received the objectives check, you will have received it directly from my email address.
Okay.
So if you check the email that you received either yesterday or today with the PowerPoint slides, with the evaluation form and the objectives check, you can just reply. You can send it back to me. For those
Okay.
of you who do not have a scanner, if you take a picture and just email it to me, that will work just as well too.
Okay, good.
Kenya,
Excellent.
we had another question about getting the recording. Is that going to be available for folks?
We haven't talked about that because I'm one of those I'm one of those people that likes to do this teaching myself. What I would suggest, rather than just sharing the recording, is if you have a team and you'd like us to do it, you can do it by that. But I would be more than pleased. We would be more than pleased to set up a time to actually do one with your team if you'd like. Go ahead, Kenya. You were going to answer about the recording.
Yeah, it was along the same lines. The thing is, because this is a CEU approved class through the NCIA, the recording may be available later on in the future, but we are more than happy to have Murray go out and do the presentation in person or through a private webinar. That is also another option.
Right, and if any of you are interested in that, just respond either to me or to Kenya, and we will get that set up. Any other questions, thoughts, comments before we let you all go about other things in your life?
No, I just thank you, and it was a good class, good seminar, and it'll be very useful, I think, in my daily work at the facility. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's always my pleasure to share this information.